Greetings, YouTube. This is the Nerdtastic Pirate speaking to you from the future. We had a few technical difficulties in shooting this video, so if we reach, I don't know, 100,000 views, not subscribers, 100,000 views on this video, I'll reshoot it because it was 3.5 hours roughly of material, so I hope you enjoyed. This is meant to be a primer for dungeon masters who want to run the Tomb of Horrors, and this gives them a lot of information. So please enjoy. So hello everyone. My name is I'm the Nerdtastic Pirate, and I'm here to talk to you about the Tomb of Horrors today. It's a module that was created in first edition, and it has been converted since. I was not overly impressed with the 5th edition conversion, and one thing led to another, and here I am making a presumably very long YouTube video for this. We'll see how long it ends up being in the end. So, a couple housekeeping things here really quick. This video should be watched by dungeon masters only. If you are a player who wants to play in the Tomb of Horrors, go away. Don't watch this video, please. You'll spoil it for yourself, and I would actually be very sad if that happened for you. So please don't spoil this for yourselves. Dungeon Masters, kind of same thing. If you haven't gotten a chance to play yet, I really strongly recommend you try to play, find somebody to play it with. If you can't, you'll be in the same position I was, and I still fell in love with this module. So let's get talking about it. My background, I don't want to go over too much, but I've been playing the game for 15 some years. I've been in D&D since 3.5. It's a game that I've had a lot of fun with. I've had some good DMs, I've had some bad DMs. I've made some big mistakes as a dungeon master, and I've had some pretty good triumphs as a dungeon master, so, experienced in the way that only time allows you to have experienced it. In preparing to run this dungeon for my players, I did over 100 hours of research, and in that time I really fell in love with the design of this dungeon, and it really inspired me because of how clever it was, but it made me sad because of how poorly it has aged over time, and I I think it can be improved, and when I say improved, I don't mean we can make it better than it was. I mean, I think we can bring it back to the state it was meant to be in when it was originally designed, and updated to our modern understandings of the game. And we'll talk more about why that's complicated in a little bit here. Just so as a point of cringe bragging, I have gotten so invested in this particular module that I actually wrote bard song lyrics and a general tune for this, which I'm not going to be going over in this. We're going to spare everyone that, but I am very interested in this lore, and I would like to share it with you, so let's get on to it. And then one last bit of housekeeping for framing this. I'm going to be focusing on the first edition module and the 5th edition conversion, and then largely pointing to issues with the conversion and how we can improve it. I'm not going to be talking very much about the other conversions, although there will be a few points where they will come up in discussion, so we'll come back to that when we circle around to it. Okay, so the tomb. A brief history of the tomb and its origins. One of the things that I think maligns this Tomb of Horrors is the fact that players nowadays, and probably a lot of dungeon masters, don't understand the context of the fact that this was originally a tournament module. And the reason that's important is because It wasn't designed to be played by you and your friends on the weekend, and then you pick it up again next weekend when you don't finish it. It was designed for people to show up at a convention, and they have 3 or 4 hours maybe, and they have to finish this adventure in that time. And it is actually scored. And so the adventures are designed so that they are very linear, and there are clear scoring events. And that's largely based off of rooms cleared and how much treasure you acquired. This historical context is a little bit lost in our modern sensibilities of design typically. And so if you're playing with players who are not exposed to that backdrop and they don't have that framework of understanding it, there's going to be a bunch of places in the dungeon, and I'll point these out later on when we go on a room by room analysis. There's going to be a bunch of places where the game asks the players to do something that just doesn't make sense. It feels very inorganic now, but it would have made sense in the context of this tournament situation. So some of the background and the thing I want people to remember when they're considering this module is that it's a timed event where teams competed to clear the dungeon with the highest score. And so that expectation of the players going into it is going to affect how the dungeon is designed, which now affects how it is received today. I had briefly mentioned this before, but I will make sure to make it clear. Because this is a tournament module and the scoring system exists, there are a series of proper decisions to make. And because of how this dungeon is designed, in fact, a lot of the dungeon can be completed without rolling in the way that we would do that now. So it's much more of a in the conception of the designer of Gary Gygax, the designer of this particular dungeon, it is a thinking person's dungeon. It's not meant for I roll dice and I get lucky, so I get to collect the treasure or beat the monster. It's I have to think of the answer to this, or I'm just not going to get anywhere. I'm just going to be stumped. I'll be sitting in this room for the next 30 minutes until the tournament's over and I lose. So it's that keeping in the background that pressure, that time pressure, that's part of how people are going to make mistakes in this dungeon, and you shouldn't have people making those mistakes now as players if they are not under that tight time constraint. So we're going to talk about how you should bring some of that constraint back for the purposes of exploration, but probably not quite the same level of pushing your players into making suicidal mistakes. So we'll talk about that when we actually come to improving. Because of this, you have a highly linear design, and as mentioned, there's a number of rooms that are basically designed specifically to waste time at the table, not in-game time, but table time, and burn up. Well, I mean, some of it was turns in the actual tournament because turns would be part of it, but it's really about burning up table time so that players don't get further in the dungeon. And this is the other part of that. So since there was an expectation that the group would be moving in turns that took 10 minutes, because that was the baseline time in my understanding from earlier editions. You have a 10-minute turn, and so the party is moving in a block in those 10-minute turns. So when a party comes across a trap, they're all together when they come across that trap. Or at least they're close enough that they probably all need to worry about it. Frankly, from a meta perspective, players probably won't want to split up in the Tomb of Horrors, but to a certain extent, spreading out is actually a really smart play for players in the Tomb of Horrors, because when you're grouped up, you can get got by a bunch of things that will actually wipe a party. But there's a whole bunch of things where you might be able to save a party member if they fall under that. So it originally would have assumed you would have all gotten sucked into this trap. The 5e conversion doesn't really set that up very well, so there's a bunch of traps that would have originally been deadly, but don't really come out to be the same level of dangerousness now for those reasons. And we'll talk a little bit more about those more specifically when we come to them. Okay, so the Tomb of Horrors was originally designed to test the players. As mentioned prior, we have a thinking person's dungeon. This dungeon has a whole bunch of factors that are designed to basically go after the psyche of the player and force them to, and trick the, and provoke them into making mistakes, which will then make them fail the tomb. So we have psychological tricks and subverting expectations. This is a constant thing of, do we know what's, we have like the poem, for example, and the poem, very often players will receive it and they don't trust it, and then they start to like be like, well, but I mean, like, it is kind of starting to make sense. And so they come around to this point where they're like, do we trust this? Can we trust this? What information can we trust? And you have the false endings and the theatrics, which we'll talk more about that more specifically a little bit later on, and how some of that has been lost in the current through the conversion process. And I'm pretty sure it predated the 5th edition conversion, so it's not specifically the 5e converter's fault on that or anything like that. And it's really just more of a modern sensibilities thing, and something that Gary had taken a risk with that probably is, maybe Gary could take that risk, but a lot of dungeon masters, it's a lot harder to take those risks. But we're getting ahead of ourselves just a little bit. Impatience and frustration. This dungeon pisses players off. It makes them frustrated because it stumps their normal ways of dealing with things. Typically, unless you are a dungeon master who has already run this module, and probably don't need to watch this video, but if you're a person who has run this module and really liked it, and you enjoyed the cerebral gameplay, and you've just been mind wrecking your players on a weekly basis with cerebral puzzles and traps, good on you. That's probably not most players' experience. So when they can't just push a button on their spells on their sheet and just get an answer, they have to start thinking for themselves. And when they fail initially, because the dungeon kind of it has a sort of internal logic which it trains you as a player to observe and kind of get in contact with before the end. But until then, players are kind of left fumbling, and it doesn't feel good until they start figuring things out. And then they feel pretty smart, which is actually one of the reasons why this is a really fun module to run, because you have the reputation of it's impossible, it's going to wreck us. And then they get in there and they're like, oh man, it's not so bad. And they're like, oh my God, this is frustrating. And then they get to the, I feel pretty smart. We got pretty far. And that's a rewarding experience for both the dungeon master, in my experience, to see that in the players, and for the players who get to, say, I reached this far. Setup and payoff. Almost everything we have in the dungeon is a clue to something else. That is a whole other video of like breaking down all the connections and how this thing connects to that. So I'm not going to go into all that today, but there is quite a bit of the dungeon setting up player expectations and then having something where it comes back into play with a little rhyme, a little bit of a different rhyme, but same kind of tune. Um, and so that's something that um, it's more, again, it's about making sure the players are engaging with the material, not their character sheet. Um, and the other thing, the last thing, and this is something that I think um, players can be really disappointed with, unless you get to the very last boss and you fight the boss, which you don't have to do technically. This dungeon sucks for combat. There's almost no real combats in the current conversion. Uh, we will discuss at least one thing where that might have been a little different in the original edition, because the gargoyle in the first area is actually pretty nasty in the first edition, it looks like. I don't know why it lost so much bite in the conversion process, but it has half the amount of attacks and it has less HP than the original monster, which shocking, actually. I was very surprised. HP used to be much less inflated, so that's unusual. Interesting. We'll come back to that when we get there. All right, so the conversion history and complications because of conversion. There's a bunch of mechanical rules that the first edition version of Tomb of Horrors has a certain expectation of player and player character capabilities, and as the editions have gone on, there's been kind of a power creep, and players have been able to get to do more and more, and when we get to 5th edition, there's just a bunch of stuff that players can do now that they couldn't do in 1st edition. And we'll talk about that right now. So we have one of the big things that affects this dungeon in particular, and it really, I think, cripples, I would say, statistically, probably 80% of the traps go from being potentially lethal to meh. I mean, it's kind of a scratch. If you're not a 1st or 2nd level character, you probably don't really care because you can just lay down, take a nap. There's nothing hunting you in here. There's nothing forcing you to hurry. So again, unless you're under some kind of real time constraint, injuries are not actually very threatening or intimidating in this place, and you need a timer for this. This adventure needs a timer. It really does. But aside from that, the fact that you don't have any kind of threats really makes it so that people can kind of take turns taking light damaging traps and be okay. And that is that's not how. It's really not. I feel like that first down football mentality for D&D is really toxic, bad vibe to have going on, and I think this is something that the Tomb of Horrors really gets punished for, because again, if you failed your death save in 1st edition, in my best understanding, you died typically. So versus you get poisoned for 10 minutes or a minute, and you take 2d6 poison damage. Not even close. So poison damage being nerfed essentially is huge, because of all the poison pit traps. Those are they're not necessarily the most likely to pick up a death, but if you lose your trap finders, or you get somebody who gets dumb for some reason, they just make some dumb choices, and they start walking into places they shouldn't have been just meandering off, then, pick up a kill with it. Um, when you're running the tomb, you don't really worry about how you pick up the kills. You just let them happen. And I like to root for the players, but it is wildly entertaining to see people fail to the tomb because of the setup. Again, we'll talk about one particular setup later, and I look forward to seeing a player do it. I want to run the tomb until I see a player do that. So we'll get back to that. Players in the earliest editions. Oh yeah, searching. Holy crap. Exploration, totally different from now to first edition. Um, you're talking about searching for traps. Nowadays, you can, at first level, have probably a passive perception of like 15 or something if you build right or something like that. And anything that's not a hard trap, you have, basically a 90% success chance first level. Earlier editions of D&D, you had, I think it was a 1 in 3rd chance of finding secrets, and then dwarves and rogues, I think, found them on a 50% chance. So that was as good as you could get, a 50% chance. No, I have a 90% chance of finding the trap or the secret door. It just wasn't a thing. So there was an expectation of repeating efforts and failing some things with characters in the earlier editions that is not quite the same. Also, they typically were a little more descriptive in exploration, so you had players you had the setup originally, you had a caller, and the caller was like the team lead for your D&D party, and the dungeon master would like resolve things, and then the caller would tell the dungeon master, this is what the team wants to do this turn. And so like the caller would get all the players, wrangle the players, get all what the players wanted to do, and then put it into a cohesive format for the dungeon master then to work with, and the dungeon master then resolved it. Kind of a pretty interesting way to do it. I can see why it's not as in vogue, I suppose, nowadays, but it seems like an interesting process. So we had this long, tedious exploration process that was part of the fun in earlier editions because you didn't get much, and I'm going to jump a point here, but you didn't get XP primarily for fights. You got it for gold. And so the best thing you could do was avoid fights and just get the gold. So exploring and finding the secret passages and the secret, compartments and all that, where you could find the gold, or you could find the bypasses to get around the guards so you could steal the gold without having to fight, meant you got out with more gold because you weren't spending resources to stay in there to fight, like torches. And you weren't wasting food, and you weren't wasting potions, because healing was way harder. You didn't have healing on rest. You had to use cleric spells to heal. So your cleric would get their spells back with rest, but then they'd burn it. So you might spend a day healing up and doing nothing else. But that meant that you were losing time. So it's some of the mechanical processes don't really support the basic underlying assumptions that the tomb operates under, and it's part of what dates the tomb. And this is just generally speaking, PC health is much larger than it used to be. You were talking, I think, I want to say like a wizard originally had a D4 for hit points. And I don't think there was a modifier. I think it was just a D4. Roll a D4 and that's how many hit points you have. For a long time. 4 hit points at most. So you were talking about some probably casters now in 5th edition start with more HP than some fighting classes probably did in 1st edition. You're talking about better to hit, better armor class, better resistances. Just generally players have increased in power relative to the monsters because players now exist, PCs now exist to fight monsters, whereas before they existed to survive monsters, maybe if you got lucky. They weren't there to fight monsters. They were to get away from monsters, and be smarter, outsmart monsters. So we have, and then the other thing is spells. Oh my God, spells can do so much more now, and they've always been, spellcasters have always been more powerful than martial characters, but originally there was more of this trade-off where they started off behind because they had that really low HP and they didn't have spells really for a while. They had to wait a while till they could get spells, and then they only had a few. So they were, kind of a one-trick pony for and then if they got a lot of experience, then they could actually be kind of decent, but still squishy. So there's things like a trap, like a pit trap that you have to get around. Now everybody can fly now. You got fairies with the ability to fly as a player race. You've got the fly spell where you can give it to other people. I mean, it's not that you didn't have fly before, but it was less. It would have been a little bit less spammable, and so the mechanics don't really support the Tomb of Horrors as a much more than a single adventuring day for a party of really weird level, because only the boss is actually dangerous. The rest of it's probably honestly a 3rd level adventure. Sorry. But for 5th edition, this is basically at least vanilla, the vanilla book that they gave us with the DCs that they have. It's a level 5 adventure. And anybody who says otherwise is just talking about the boss. The rest of it is not that hard. Not in ways that are really meaningful. So it's not scaled very well for higher level parties. And the it doesn't scale very well. So anyway, so that's part of the issue with the module. Instant punishment. There are a few times in the module where people can be very instantaneously punished for a mistake, and it may or may not be their mistake, which is probably why it's ill-received now. Thinking of the Juggernaut, if you get killed by the Juggernaut because somebody else opens the door, people could be upset by that. I feel like that's part of again, we have a expectation, sort of PC privilege, where we expect our PCs to generally have a life expectancy worth mentioning. And that really wasn't as much the case in original Dungeons and Dragons for the most part. So again, we have a cultural expectation of the time being very different, and it shows in the material produced for consumption. That said, the instant death stuff in the tomb is actually pretty rare. If you're not familiar with it, it's actually not that common. Even in the original module, I mean, except for the poison traps, but that was just, if poison's bad, bring antivenom, don't get poisoned. I don't know. Uh, that was just part of the hazards. So I don't think it wasn't really, at least as far as unique stuff, except from the poison. The original dungeon did not have a lot of very deadly things, which is part of why I said we needed to upgrade the poison damage, because without it, we don't really have much of a dungeon. Minor damage. Yeah. So without a time crunch pressing our players, as we mentioned, most of the damage from traps is relatively minor. We're talking somewhere between a D6 and 2D10. Not the kind of damage that is going to really generally threaten players again above 5th level. I mean, and again, they're not being forced to go into the next room, so unless they get outright downed and killed by something, they're just going to go drag their buddy back to the next room and heal. So you have to get wiped by the tomb largely now, because you don't have those other constraints that are really pushing player error. So uh, the minor damage by the traps is a problem, and it's why I think we need to force a time crunch so that players are still limited in the amount of resources they have to reset that damage. Um, and uh, if you're at a really high level party, I think if you're running a 14th level party, which is the higher end of, I guess, what they suggested, for the previous versions, I think it's going to be a cakewalk. I mean, maybe the boss won't be. Maybe. I tend to doubt the boss is going to be challenging to most groups, if they have any kind of synergies going on. I could be wrong, but base kit boss is not that dangerous or scary, but we're going to fix that. Okay, so we have... yes, okay, so in conclusion on this overview, it's easy to see where this conversion is strained badly by the expectations in culture, from the players and the mechanics between the past and the present. And it's easy to see, because of that, how it can be poorly received by players who are not prepared for what the experience is meant to be, including the mental work that's involved in playing through the tomb. So that's the overall view. As far as design, we're going to go over some brief design observations, and then we will get down to the room by room analysis, which is going to take the bulk of this video. And we are at 35 minutes, so probably another 20 minutes for this, and then probably 2 hours for the other, I'm guessing. Okay, so one cut expert jumps master cut. Let's go. Design observations and the 5e conversion. So remember, we're going to set the framework for the past and present, and maybe adjust some of our setup for this. So the entryway to the tomb is entirely meant to be a time waster, and it's meant to prepare players for the painstaking, time-wasting process that is going to come. There are several sections within the tomb that basically do this again. You have the tilting room, for example, the tilting floor room. That room's a perfect example of a room that is just basically there to waste time. The fact that there's a trap in there that could kill someone is basically an afterthought. It's more or less there just to waste time, and just like this. So this is a tournament hangover. it's what can you do? The tomb, yeah, so this is something I've realized in my research, and it's something that seems like it's been missed mostly in the videos I've seen. The tomb, I feel, is actually designed to help players. It is designed specifically to help players grow and display their skill in solving problems where um, the format of limited information being useful locally almost exclusive is almost exclusively is the format. So when you have a clue in the dungeon, once you get a clue, it's almost immediately going to be used. Whatever you find a resource, it's almost immediately going to be like it's not going to be used in this room, but the next room is where you should be looking to use it. So the formula of the dungeon is I do this, then this, then this, then this, then this, then this, and so it's very much A B A B A B. So once you know that as a player, all you have to do is figure out like, okay, so I have A. So now that I know what A is, what's B? And then once you start asking that question, you're going to start going in the right direction a little bit, just a little bit faster. All right, so players, because of the players are intended to notice the patterns and the increase in intensity, which is demarcated by certain repeating landmarks. For example, the archways indicate basically where you have this tutorial section, a sort of testing section, and then you have the all right, now we have full application, and we are getting to the dangerous part. And then once you have the first false ending, you are in the now it's the serious time. But it keeps staging up. So it's kind of broken into different stages based on these recurring things, and you see these patterns of 3 repeating, and so there is some kind of there are some internal logics in the tomb as we go, and I think that's useful for players. I don't know that I typically see people pick up on it, but it is there. Let's see here. So as specific evidence of this, I'm going to talk about. So we have the specifically we're going to use the archways and the false endings. The tutorial section, we're going to call it. We have from basically the all of the entryway, all of the first hall. The first Misty Archway and the Crimson Message are a section where death is really only possible by an affirmative action by a player. So the player has to stick their head inside the Green Devil's mouth at this point. Otherwise, they're not going to die. Like I guess they can fall in the trap, but they have to move through the space with the trap. Like nothing is going to kill them if they just stand still here. So this section of the dungeon is relatively safe and gives the players a area where they can kind of interact and start to learn how the dungeon wants them to interact with it. Mistakes here can generally be reversed if you use the Misty Archway when you make a mistake. It could actually kind of help you because it can show you, if you're perceptive enough, you could find the secret passage to the next section. You can just completely, I goofed up and I still got to the next section. So you can kind of actually force your way through the area by making errors through the first section. That is not going to be possible later on, but right now it is. From the first archway to the second, the tomb provides opportunities for solving the clues that we've established with the poem and adjusting to the clue structure before we move into the more dangerous areas. So we train players to understand, oh, that poem does mean something. Like it was, we may not have used it first, but now that we're seeing this and we're in the second hall, we're seeing it is actually kind of meaning something. So it kind of establishes player trust in the poem, which is important because it's largely there to meant to help guide the players to know when they are on the right path. The last archway marks the point past which return is unlikely, or is at least likely to cost more than the players can imagine, as is the case with the orange misty archway and the skeleton hinting as as the skeleton ominously hints as it lies on the ground. Between the second and third archway, the players are required to use their gained treasure to interact with the environment to advance. This will come up again later. Multiple times we are going to have to use things we've collected from the environment to advance. So we can see we have multiple stages that we're moving through in this initial stage before the false ending, where it's kind of like, okay, so here's the tomb, and now that you're smart enough to actually realize, no, that's not really it, we still need to go deeper, now it's going to be serious. And it does get serious from there. The first false ending and the collapse is very polarizing. I think it's kind of polarizing design, but it continues the steps as before, which is going to train the players to not trust what the dungeon master is telling them and to think for themselves and to think back to the poem. It is such an abrupt ending that people who are reacting to it, that I've seen react to it on the internet, who are like, oh, this is like a dumb. In my experience, players don't buy it. Not even for like an instant. They're not like, oh, I guess it's over. They're like, what? No, no way. Not a chance. And they press on. That has been my experience. And I've run this for a couple, like half a dozen groups now. So I'll get back to you on this if that changes, but I don't expect it to. It's very abrupt, and it's actually part of something, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit when we get to the individual room breakdowns, but it's actually part of a hangover of something else that's going on here, and it's Gary taking some chances with some mechanics that were kind of cool, actually, but you can't do them now. It's not going to work, so totally different, again, totally different culture. Let's see here. So we've got the fact that, let's see here, we got the players. Yeah, we don't want the players to trust what the DM is telling them as much as what do they actually see? What do they actually know? And then we want them to think for themselves and not just trust, no, I guess it's over. Which is going to come important later, because if they go for the second fake Acerac or the third fake Acerac, depending on how you want to look at things, it's definitely telling them, it's setting them up just like before. We're going to see a repeating pattern of archways. We're going to see a repeating pattern of false endings. I think the lack of subtlety in this false ending is actually kind of a clever design, because it's so unconvincing. It actually, it works. It works, at least in my experience. After the false week ending, we get the real dungeon and traps, which start to actually potentially threaten the party with single elimination instant kills or potentially TPKs. We have more false endings coming up. The boss fight is pretty dependent on, and I think this has been true probably for every conversion, it's very dependent on who and what resources are left at the end when a Serac makes his dramatic entrance. If you have a full party still and a bunch of high-level casters, Serac probably not going to stand much of a chance. If you only have a few people, probably going to dominate the party. It kind of does be like that. It's less so now, because before he didn't give saves. He just zapped you. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But Serac used to be much scarier. So he's put on some some ugly baggage somewhere along the way, and he's not quite the lethal killing machine he used to be. Maximum level 5e characters with suggested gear will almost assuredly make easy work of the boss, whose health is artificially low. More on that later. If you do want to keep the boss in the tomb, I briefly, I'm just going to mention this, double its health. If you want to have the boss fight, double its health. Don't don't run out with the health. Double it. The boss fight is, that said, you might have to judge things based on your players, and I think you need to make a decision before you run whether you want to keep the fight closer to the party, or if you just want it to be, no, this thing's not supposed to be beatable, you're all supposed to die, and fuck you. I don't know. I think you could potentially make the, you could do the ending where you basically have an easier boss or no boss, and you just have a bunch of like troll loot. That's an option. The thing is, this boss fight, it's not just easy, it's boring. And I say that because the original boss had some really cool shit. Granted, it was weird, but the original boss had some really cool stuff you could do to fight it. It required specific ways to be injured, including basically it required several novas to damage it in order to and then kill it. You needed like nova spells or like very high level gear like vorpal swords. You could use the shatter spell because it's filled with crystals. So like all the spells that were like appropriate for it were like very unique and specific, but they were like things where you could be like, okay, so this is a floating crystal skull. What would work against a floating crystal skull? I know. I'll use my shatter spell. Now, the thing that I think no one would guess now, and maybe this was something from like a video game trope or something at the time. This is probably the most creative thing I think I've seen in D&D, and no one, I don't know, I mean, like, it would have been crazy then, but it almost sounds crazier now, maybe. They were, one of the ways you could attack it was throwing gems from its own treasure hoard. So you could be like, get into the room, and then you're like, oh crap, my sword doesn't hurt this thing, and you're like, oh, I know, I see that diamond over there, and you like run over and you pick up this diamond, and you're just like, oh god, I hope I can hit with this before I break this diamond that's worth, basically retirement for the next 10 years for this character. Yes, I beamed the monster and I did 5 HP. Yeah, yay, yay. I mean, granted, that would have been 10% of its HP, but it was it was a much more fun, I think, boss in conception because you had to be creative to kill it. It wasn't just get in there and swing like every other monster in the game. I have a player who just started playing a character who pretends to be a lumberjack, and he just talks about chopping down trees when he's talking about chopping down monsters, and it's not that far from it. Like, it does feel pretty very often like they're just chopping lumberjacks chopping down trees. The monsters have that much of a chance, in a fight. So yeah, it's kind of a very disappointing boss fight, I think. So in conclusion, without any alterations, the 5e conversion widely misses the mark on what players gained from playing the original module. It's more accurately appropriate, again, for a party of first or second tier, except for the Demi-Lich boss. Level 1 or 2 PCs who weren't on a super tight crunch would actually be probably a super fun way to run this. And I would consider that if you wanted to. If you wanted to run the dungeon at level 1 or 2, You could swap a mummy or have just have the demi lich already be defeated, or maybe your players will be smart and they just won't touch the obviously evil skull of death, and they won't have to fight it in the first place. General. Okay, so now we're gonna get into room by room, and we're gonna do some really quick specific, or we're gonna do some really quick general suggestions, and then we're going to get into the specific analysis of each room by room. Here we go. General suggestions for running Tomb of Horrors for your players as a dungeon master. Run this as a one-shot. Unless you have a really good reason for introducing this to your actual campaign. Given the frustration that this thing can induce, if you have a bunch of like chaotic players and they don't mind death and chaos and challenging stuff, sure, throw it in if you want. I don't think this dungeon is something that you can just drop into most games with most players. I think you need to get buy-in from players for this dungeon. I always think getting the consent of the players for the content you're going to be going into is a good idea. Generally speaking, at least broad brush, we're going to fight some orcs or we're going to do, this kind of stuff. If you don't have that, generally it's a problem. It's more of an issue, I think, with this kind of a module because it is such a culture shock for the reasons I have previously described. And new players who are not ready, willing, and very eager to get into some old school D&D might not have a lot of fun. So I wouldn't spring it on people. I would do it as a one shot. I would suggest running it as a continuous initiative experience. So I would just keep the clock running. Don't really give them a lot of, do things in turns around the table. You can do it in a more historical basis with that 10-minute round turn in your mind for the party, and then go around the table. Bob, what do you want to do? Anne, Carl. Okay, so you're doing the, Bob's going to be searching the walls. Carl's going to be tapping out on the floor to check for traps, and Don is going to be listening down the hall. Okay, so the next 10 minutes pass. Let's get the rolls. Okay, done. All right, so this is what you know. That's how I'd suggest doing that. Keep the time running. If you run rounds in 10 minutes like it was originally done, that keeps your time tracking easier for the dungeon, and we will talk about a little bit more specifically about that in just a little bit here. Use art handouts from both the original and the art from the 5e stuff if it's where you can supplement the visual information. Very specific instance here is the throne room picture. If you have the original picture and then you have the newer picture, if you show the players both pictures, you won't actually need them to make a DC 15 perception check to see the stuff that they can actually see in the picture, and they can ask questions about themselves. So use the pictures, use the handouts, use those pictures where you can. You want to be speaking as little as possible actually when you are running this module, which is weird. It's very backwards typically from a normal module, a normal adventure where the dungeon master wants to kind of curate the environment and experience. This is an experience where you want to kind of leave the players alone with the dungeon, and you're just there to make sure they know that they're staying within the boundaries. That's it. So yeah, I definitely recommend using as much art as you can. That's not going to tip anything away, but use the art. Use the art, especially like we'll talk about the specific hidden information stuff a little bit later. Have players create 2 to 3 player PCs with 2 to 30 or 2 to 20 levels to distribute between those two PCs, and don't let any of them go higher than 14th level. Give them enough gold to improve their basic gear. Limit any items that give uses of spells per day. Allow for any special travel or movement abilities. Or because those things are going to really chip away at the design. If you give them a carpet of flying, there's a whole bunch of shit that just goes away. Do not give them carpet flying. Do not give them anything that lets them fly. And definitely don't let them have anything that lets the group fly. If one character has something that only lets them fly, it's still a problem because they can do things like here's an example I had from when I was playing. I had a character who basically just tied a rope onto himself, took a lantern, and then just walked down the hallway, the first hallway, and then didn't fall into the traps because he could fly, and he was ready. So he would prepare to jump and fly when he should have been falling into a trap and getting stabbed. So don't let players fly. I recommend against letting any player races that are capable of flying because they are entirely inappropriate for this dungeon. Sorry fairies. Sorry Aarakocra. Sorry Azamar and tieflings. Yeah, flying stuff does not belong in this dungeon. Which it just is what it is. It doesn't belong in here. There's too many things it breaks. Let's see here. Yeah, so the other thing is, so with this larger group of adventure characters that the players have multiple characters in, this is closer to original design of exploration. I believe. Let me double check. Yeah, this dungeon has information on having up to 10 players, and it suggests that if you have 5 players or less, you have multiple characters per player. And even more strange than that, among the options for the 10-player option, when I said each player gets a character, I'm guessing you were thinking every player has a character of the same level. But what if I told you that some of those setups suggested characters who had players with characters at level 1 and players with character at level 20? So we had a whole. You had 0 level characters back then, so it wasn't technically the highest and lowest level possible, but it was basically the highest and lowest level possible for characters, and you'd have both of those characters going to the Tomb of Horrors, being played at the same time by players, 2 different players. I don't think you'd see that today. I don't think anyone would sign up for a game where they would get to be the first level character and then be at the same table with somebody who's a 20th level character. That is very, very alien. That is very alien, but it's reflective of what would have been expected at the time. So that's another part of the problem with adjusting some of the challenges of this module, because it expects basically champions and squires to be going in simultaneously and trying to survive together, and that's not how we play anymore. So that's another limitation from the conversion. I recommend limiting the exploration to somewhere between 24 and 72 hours of game time. You can adjust this basically by 24-hour periods. I would say 24 hours is hard. 24 hours, your characters should be, the player characters should be probably pretty high level, because you're forcing them to hustle. They are going to make mistakes if they have a 24-hour limit, and they're probably going to pick up some deaths because they're going to be hurrying. Um, that is something that is gonna force player error. So 24 hours, hard run through the tomb. If you want to make the experience hard, give your players a 24-hour period, a 24-hour timer, and make them 11th level. That will sufficiently challenge players of almost any skill, I'd imagine. If you want to make it a little bit easier and take it easy on players, especially if you don't know these players particularly well, or if you have any people who are going to get grumpy, but they're kind of being good sports enough to participate, I'd suggest the 72 hour. 72 hours is way more than enough. That gives them all kinds of time to mess around, but it doesn't let them spam heal and cheese things. And it doesn't let them change their spells. If you have people who can prepare a bunch of spells, they can't abuse their spell preparation stuff too much with that. So 48 hours is probably honestly the sweet spot. You'll have a little bit of a time crunch as things go on, but I think you definitely need a time crunch. You also want to make sure that they are isolated. The location has always been designed to be fluid. It can be anywhere. That's just part of the background. Because of this, it's typically in an isolated place, and the reason you want it isolated is you don't want any external help or resources coming in. So put it somewhere where players can't go get help, and put a timer on it. So they have to do it now, and they can't go get help. They can't go get stuff. Once they're in, they're stuck. You can let them leave, but like if they leave, they're done. You want to make sure that they can't just bounce in and out and go, phone a friend for help. That said, give your players, not just your player characters, but give your players permission to retreat and not play the game if it isn't fun for them. As much as I can do, as much as you can do to try to make this a fun module, I think some people just aren't going to like it because of how it's designed. And this is just part of being a dungeon master and saying, okay, some people won't like that. We'll just keep going. So yeah, I wouldn't. I would not try to make people. Especially if you're doing this to your players, just give them an out. Don't make them play it if they don't want to. And if you can't run it for your players, then find some other players to run it for. There's ways to find players if you're super excited like I am about running the Tomb of Horrors. So, that said, also warn your players. Don't just give them permission to retreat. Give them information. Tell them this is not a combat-heavy adventure. Especially if they make a solo, if they're doing a solo, or if you're running this as a one-shot, and they build their super deadly barbarian, and then they find out there's nothing they're going to get to fight except for the boss, who's going to make them make a charisma save, and then they're not going to get to do anything else. Tell them. Don't let them get to the point where they're like, oh. Just tell them it's not a combat-heavy adventure, and that they should make well-rounded characters who are capable of everything. Tell them logic and reasoning are key. Dice rolls are way less important than your brain in this adventure, and players should know that going in. If they just want to show up and roll dice, this is not the module for them. This is something that is going to require player investment and buy-in. If you have players who just kind of want to show up, eat some popcorn, drink some beer, hang out with their buddies, and they don't take the game seriously, I don't think this is probably the module for them, because you have to pay attention to everything, and everything offers hints at how to not die in other sections. So player specificity with this one. Let's see here. I missed. Yeah. Character sheets. This thing is designed to neutralize character sheets. Make sure players know. Uh, that's cool. You have a 20th level barbarian. Can you make a 19 charisma check? Okay, cool. You don't have a character anymore. Even if the boss is defeated, yeah, you don't have a body anymore. Yeah. So your 24 strength does nothing. I'm afraid. Sorry. Um, make sure they understand that there are most of the things in this dungeon their sheet is not going to give them an answer to. They are going to have to come up with an answer themselves. So if they go into it knowing that, that makes it much more enjoyable for players. I'd warn them that they may end up feeling discouraged by certain aspects of the module, which literally uses psychology to attack the players directly. Example of this is the orange mist. If you take a character's all their gear away, drop them naked, and you also say, oh, by the way, your alignment, which was way more important in previous editions. I don't really have a lot of points on that, but it is, I suppose, worth mentioning. That would potentially make it so that a character was unusable in previous editions. Um, it's designed to cripple your character in a way that is psychologically painful for the player, to induce them to give up and make mistakes again, and to make mistakes. We are going to have, and then lastly, we're going to rewarn them of the general. We want to generally prepare them for the possibility that they will that they will fail to conquer the tomb individually or collectively. This is not a scenario where, because I don't want to say unfortunately, but much of the current content for 5th edition expects the players to succeed because this is a high fantasy adventure system now. It's not where it started. And the Tomb of Horrors doesn't really know that. So it's not going to support that fantasy for players. So making sure they go into it knowing the expectations of player success ratio are very different. It's much closer to like you have games that are cooperative against the board. Those are typically very low win rates because otherwise it's boring because you just cakewalk it. So it needs to be hard to be interesting. Same general principles apply here in the game mechanics. Okay, so general suggestions to improve the module from the conversion side of things, not the general overall design. It's a joke how easy they have it to find hidden stuff in this module in the 5e conversion. There's stuff that's just like DC 15 perception check for something that's hidden. And it's not the kind of stuff where it's like obvious, like it's hidden kind of in the open, and it should probably not be a perception check at all. It should probably just be, you just find it if you look for it, which is how it was expected to be in the past for some of these things, I think, based on how it was written in the original entry. But yeah, no, so the perception and the investigation checks, not only do you need to buff the difficulty probably to 20, 25 generally, you need to roll those in secret as the dungeon master. So let the players declare that they want to search an area and all that stuff and say, okay, yeah, all right. So I understand what Bob is doing. I understand what Joe is doing. I understand what Carl is doing. I understand where each of you is searching and what each of you is using to search. And I'll roll these in secret. And then, depending on what I roll, I'll tell people if they found something or not. If they're 1 point off, then they just don't know. This is something that it's unfortunate because a lot of players might not like it, but Don't let them use passive perception to do not let them use passive perception to just find things, and do not let them bully bully you into giving them information by rolling in the open. You just say it doesn't matter. I will roll all of these things. Get a note card, write all your player search stuff down, and just do that stuff so that they should be in the dark. This is not typically, I would not necessarily advice I would give all the time, but for the Tomb of Horrors, keep them in the dark when they're searching. Don't let them know they missed something because they rolled a 1. Don't let them know that they rolled a 2 and their result was a 10 when they were searching. Don't let them know. Don't let them know. Just keep them in the dark on that, and they will search more organically that way. It has worked. I've seen this in actual practice. It does work. They were very resistant initially, and then once they get used to it and they realize you're not trying to like jerk them over on information. Oh, okay, yeah, yeah. It's for your fun. It's for your fun. And if you have any pushback, tell them it's for your fun. If you can just tell you missed something because you rolled a 10, then you're basically cheating. You have wall hacks. You have wall hacks that indicate, oops, I missed a search check. It's not, don't do that. Don't do that, especially not for Tomb of Horrors. Maybe if you have some kind of light dungeon, it's fine. Don't do it for the Tomb of Horrors. Keep it special. Same thing. I mentioned this earlier. You want to limit your information leakage, and the best way to do that, you can, as a dungeon master, is don't talk. You want to do as little as possible in the talking department. You don't want to set up anything. You only want to just give them the enough information to immerse themselves in the scenario. You want to, as a dungeon master, you can clue in your players in all kinds of nonverbal ways without realizing it. And for example, my players from in-person games know that I have a certain smirk that I'll do. But they also know that when I do it, because I've learned how to replicate it, they know if I'm doing that smirk that there's as equal a chance that they're about to get into some deep stuff, or that I'm just laughing at them, like just missing, they're like looking at the thing and they're like, I just don't see it. I don't understand where it could be, and it's right there. That's the kind of thing where they might see me, but they don't know which it is because I've cultivated that, and it's almost a reflex for me to kind of screw with my players with that smirk. So, but I'm aware of the fact that I do that. So it can give away, it can tip my hand a little bit to my players when I'm talking to them. So you want to do as much. And if you're virtual with this, I just turn off the camera. I just do that. And then you can talk to them from the void. And that talking from the void is going to prevent your face from giving away when they're about to step in that trap, and you're like, he. Don't, limit that information, rob them of the information, and make it easier for yourself to run the experience the way it's meant to do. So don't give them any extra information. Don't talk to players. This is not the time you want to be anything but just the arbiter. The design is such that the information is presented where you get just enough information to move on to the next step. So if if at any point you need to actually give a firm hint, just remind your players of the past experiences they've had in the dungeon. Be like, well, I don't know, but let's think about what's been here so far. If you've got some players that are really stumped, they really want to go on, and you've already told them the magic words for this adventure, which are, you do or you do not have everything you need or need to know to continue. That's very important. if you can, that's the only real hint I would generally offer. But if they're really struggling and they need some kind of help, I would give them the hint that they just need to look back and start following the patterns they can see from where they are at. And if you need to give them enough guidance to get to them to the point of, oh, it seems like we only get it right before we need it, then that should help them, hopefully, enough that they don't need further hints. And I don't recommend giving any other hints. That's it. That's no more than that. If they fail, let them fail. I don't generally like players failing as a dungeon master, but this is the thing. Okay, so poison. Changes to poison. We talked about this already. We're going to make changes to poison. How are we going to make changes to poison? It's pretty simple. We make it so that if a player fails a save against poison, their maximum health is reduced by the amount of damage from that poison. So if a player takes 22 points of poison damage and they fail their save versus that poison, instead of not taking half and taking the 11, they take the full 22 and their health is reduced by that much, so they can't heal back that poison damage. This is kind of a really, in my opinion, good middle ground between you are instantly killed by the poison and the poison does just a little bit of damage. This kind of bridges that gap. The poison becomes very dangerous because enough instances of you failing your save versus poison, and you're going to have 10 health, and all of a sudden that door trap that shoots the spear at you could actually kill you. So it's technically actually really dangerous at that point, but it doesn't outright immediately kill a character. So I feel like it's more agreeable with current sensibilities. I had some players who were like, and then it didn't really come up that much, and they were like, oh. And I was like, yeah, and I gave them a little bit of a history lesson on the fact that you'd be dead right now. If we were playing in first edition, you would be dead right now. And since we're making some alterations to make this a little closer to the first edition experience, you've lost some health, and it's permanent. And I'm sorry, but that's okay. And it's not actually technically permanent. We're gonna give them a way to recover it later. It's just not right now. So generally speaking, we're gonna make the change of poison reduces, any poison damage will reduce the player health permanently, absent our fixes that we propose later on. And we're gonna get into those to our specific area breakdowns, which we are now going into. And quick cover my butt sort of CYA thing. Fair use. Obviously, I've put a lot of work into this. I'm going to be putting onto the screen over here, I'm going to be putting some pictures of content from the modules, which are the maps. These maps are generally pretty widely circulated. They are available. They're still technically their property, but we're going to be using this under fair use guidelines. As this is educational and analytical material, so we are not going to be. We're not just taking advantage of this. We are actually going to be critiquing this and discussing in detail. Last bit of historical backdrop. As I was doing research, I found that I decided when I was doing my research to use pyramids to mark the entrance rather than the digging through the side of the hill, because in the module you dig through the side of a hill. It's meant to waste time. That's part of the process. It is meant to waste time in a tournament so you can get players in a time crunch. They're like, oh man, I already spent 4 hours trying to dig into this fucking hole. Gotta go. And then they run down the hall and they get the ceiling dropped on them because they yank the door open because they're in a hurry. So the digging is meant to put people in a time crunch right out the gate. And we are not going to be doing that to our players the same way. So the way I like to introduce Fest for my own self, for my own players, is I have this basically in a magical place. I give them a magical map that takes them there. So I give them the means to get there, and I put the timer on the clock with that portal that gets them there. So I give them a portal to the place in an isolated desert. So give them a very isolated location, no assistance, no outside sources. Give them a timer, leave them alone. Put them in the playpen out in the middle of the desert. So we put them in the playpen out in the desert. I use pyramids. In doing my research, it found out Gygax had been inspired by pyramids when he was designing the Tomb of Horrors. So it is a very, in my opinion, tasteful homage to the original material. And it's a really good way to update the fact that I feel like many players, you're going to have to just tell them to dig. And that is, I feel like just breaking the fourth wall as your first move in running a module is really shitty. So let's not do that. Let's give them something really obvious. Let's give them a pyramid. They know where we'll make it so that there's obviously like probably an entrance there, but you got to dig it out. So we're going to give them that same time wasting practice and experience where we set the pace and tone, but we don't make them try to guess what they're supposed to do. So we're going to update the experience just a little, and we're going to put them in an isolated place. I like to do this. I set the scene with portal to a desert with purple sand, a purplish sun and sands that are in this twilight, and 3 large pyramids rise out of the swirling sand, each with a large skull rising out of the stonework. The entrance is buried beneath feet of sand. And we put them about an hour apart from each other. We let the players waste some time traveling from one location to another. We let them waste time or resources because they can use their own abilities and powers. And I've had people just like power blast. I think I was somebody who had like a wind blast spell from their player race, and they just blasted a hole right through the sand. I was like, cool, all right, let's go. We're inside. So players can use their resources or just time to get into the entrances. So update, let's not do the hillside. I'll do the 3 pyramids. We'll make it obvious. It's fine. I don't think it's the most liberties I took with it. I don't think Gygax would frown upon it. I'll stand by it. So we got two sets of notes here, or we have two maps here. This one on our left is going to be our original, or excuse me, this is going to be our 5th edition map. This is the art that's been provided in 5th edition. A quick note for those of you who are unfamiliar with the map: it is in 10-foot scales on these squares, so each square is 10-foot scale, which actually is a real pain in the butt for mapping. Because there's things where you have a half tile and it's kind of like, oh, is it in this? So terrible format to have to try to convert. And interesting to note that this may have been more common in older editions. So we're going to be talking about this, and I'm going to be talking about the rooms specifically one by one, and I'm just going to be pointing to them on this as I reference them for sake of ease following along, because this is going to be a very long list and we're going to be going for this for a while. So for the sake of brevity and convenience, here we go. All right, so that's set up for our entrance. So let's see here what we got on the entrance. False entrance, number 1, and we are going to go sequentially. We won't. I'll cover this. I'll bring this up. This is the in my understanding, this is the original artwork that Gygax had doodled, if I'm not mistaken, and this is the artwork that was created for the module for the tournaments on the left. So we have some pretty neat stuff, and we're going to actually be covering a mystery with this a little bit later. So we'll come back to that much later when we are at the end of the dungeon. But there is something that's a surprise, a secret, clickbait. Let's go. So false entrance 1, the 5e conversion gives us a save versus damage we didn't get in the original module. This damage is designed to punish us for not doing the thing that should have been obvious, which is clearing away the cobwebs. And I think we're going to draw from that. This is a mistake if you fall into, if you get punished by this. Again, we're not worried about killing people mostly in 5th edition, and if they can get killed by this, they probably shouldn't be here, probably. So, well, you know what? No save unless somebody's within 5 foot of the doorway, because they are able to jump out from where the rubble is falling. Super simple. I don't know why they, yeah, I wouldn't, yeah, I think just don't give them a save unless they actually can leap out of the place where the ceiling is falling. So just a minor modification. I wouldn't buff the damage or anything. False entrance 2. Our conversion leaves us with an unanswered question when it comes to a creature in the path of the wall becomes pinned before it becomes paste. So we don't really have a suggestion on like when a creature becomes pinned or anything like that, which just leaves us in a bad spot. This is man. Okay, so we're going to do a quick history lesson on this specifically. In fairness to anyone who was involved in the conversion for this since the original part of this, when the wall closes in, right? So it gets triggered and the wall starts going like this. Now, typically, we just say, okay, the wall starts moving, roll initiative, right? That's how we do it now. When this was originally done, Gary would just say, the wall starts moving. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, you're dead. Very, very different. And that kind of theatrics hints at the false ending that's going to be coming up. Because these theatrics were lost along the way, I think this actually kind of makes the false ending seem weird. Like, why? But I think it's totally in tone if you look at the rest of the module in the original form. There's several places where you have this sort of break the fourth wall as the dungeon master and do a countdown. 10, 9, 8, and players start scrambling as they try to save their try to save their character. There's a couple other places. This is probably the best one where it's handled. This conversion is okay. I stamp of approval, I guess. I think the best way to do this probably is narrating the scene as this is your bullet time event for D&D. Might as well use it. Just use the initiative and treat it as your bullet time event. Other than that, not a lot to improve here. Pretty solid, pretty decent treatment of the material considering the original material is so bananas. Okay, the true entrance. Lots to talk about here. We're going to bullet point this. Dark vision. We're going to be talking about all kinds of things. We keep going here. You merely adopted the darkness, said Bane. And in this case, players, this is true. They don't understand dark vision, a lot of players. So they forget, and this is going to be true for dungeon masters too. It's very easy to forget. Dark vision is colorblind, so dark vision will not actually help you in this hallway. I know infravision was a thing in first edition, if I'm not mistaken. It might have actually been second edition. I'm not sure if it was in first edition, but I'm pretty sure no party was expected to have a whole group of characters who would see in the dark. So it expects you to use a torch or a lantern. So if you have a party of all dark vision characters, because that's 100% possible in 5th edition now, I would just describe extremely detailed grayscale in the art in the first hallway, and if they don't get the hint, then don't give them the poem. They won't get the poem at all. There's no way for them to decipher it if they don't actually go the length of the whole hall with color. So that's kind of a pain in the butt with 5th edition now. I don't know what to say other than that. But that's just a helpful reminder for you as a running it. dark vision, they won't actually see the path. So if you're running, probably the best thing is just have some of the light of day slipping in and like showing on the very first bits of the path, so that way they know it's there, and then they can't. But I guess if they go in at night, what are you going to do, right? Figure it out or draw out the map. Explaining the section, poem by section. Okay, so we're going to go over the poem because the poem is something that gets discussed, and I've seen people talk about it, and a lot of the discussions I had seen in my research were not really sure about some of the sections. So we're going to go over it in my understanding, and I have a take that I have not heard before, and this is kind of a tinfoil hat moment. So we will we'll see. We'll get to that point a little bit later. But I'm going to read the poem real quick here, and then I'll go over the points as we go through it here. Sararak congratulates you on your powers of observation. So make of this whatever you wish, for you will be mine in the end, no matter what. Go back to the Tormentor or through the arch, and the second great hall you'll discover. Shun green if you can, but night's good color is for those of great valor. If shades of red stand for blood, the wise will need not sacrifice aught but a loop of magical metal. You are well along your march. 2 pits along the way will be found to lead to a fortuitous fall, so check the wall. These keys and those are most important of all, and beware of trembling hands and what will maul. If you find the false, you find the true, and into the columned hall you'll come, and there the throne that's key and keyed. The iron men of visage grim do more than meets the viewer's eye. You've left and found my tomb, and now your souls will die. And I recommend reading it in some kind of a dramatic fashion for your players when they actually get it. If you can, give it some cadence, and that'll keep them kind of moving through it so they don't get too hung up. But yeah, as far as breaking down the poem, some of it's a lot easier than others, and then we're going to talk about our tinfoil hat thing here for a little bit. So our first line is going to establish that Sararak is a giant jerk who is actively toying with the player characters. So we right out the gate, we establish our villain and a little bit of their motivation and their methodology, which is kind of important going forward. For players to properly understand the second stanza, we need to remember that this poem is only readable once they have reached this point on the map. Right here, at the end of the hall. It's not until they're here that it becomes legible. If you give them the poem here, because they start looking at the red floor, it's all going to be messed up. You must. They literally have to get to like here to actually be able to decipher it, and then the message is like here. It's not like written in long letters along the way. It's like a code for deciphering this path, and then you get to like the end, and then when you get to the end, you can actually read the path. Is my understanding of the reading. So you had like this second thing assumes they're standing here when it says go back. So they're standing here right next to the archway. So the archway is there, and it mentions the arch. It positionally tells of the tormentor being backwards and mentions the arch as an alternative, but it tells the players to go to the tormentor first because it prioritizes that, because that's where they can get the necklace with the gems, which will get them the gem of seeing. So it's written this very specific way for a specific purpose. The warning of green is hopefully going to save us from the devil face that's right here. And this is something that's it's not really it's not out of place. So it's right. This is a part of my theory is these things are sequential. We do these things in order. Yeah. So second line is there's a little bit more to it. The warning green is going to save us from the devil face. The knight's good color refers to the black circle in the second hall, which leads deeper into the dungeon. The fourth line is a hint to use the red circle to get to the magical ring, which we must sacrifice in the coin slot, which is also hinted at here. The fifth line is pretty self-explanatory. If they fall into that, if they get to the third pit and they fall in there, they should basically see it pretty. I think it's like automatic. So, the painted door is pretty easy, and this is one where the players are like, "Oh, it's real." The keys are most important because when they are assembled, they alert a Sararak to the presence of intruders. So that's why they're most important. The trembling hands almost assuredly refers to the room with the tilting floor here in 21. And the mauling almost assuredly is the juggernaut. Let's see here. The false true hint is less useful because this really comes up way more than once. It refers to the false true door here, but let me just reword this. Okay, so we have the false ending is adjacent to the clue is basically that the false ending is adjacent to the true path to the actual end, right? Or no, I'm sorry. I'm making the case that we have the false ending right next to the true path. Then once we reach this false true door, we have another false hallway with another false hallway with another true hidden passage. And then from here on, we have a series of false endings. And if let's see here, I wrote this down. Where is this? Oh yeah, so here we have a fake door leading to a secret wall / door that opens to a passage, and immediately beyond is a secret door in the floor. It's very convoluted. So this is a not super useful hint, in my opinion, particularly because we have these other repeating things. That said, maybe it does kind of steer people back to it, so not the most useful part of this hint. The Iron Men are in this room, and obviously they block the doorway here for the little slide that leads to the end. And then the last line. Oh yeah, and then but usually it gets a jump scare from people because they think the statues are going to attack. Okay, so here's the tinfoil hat moment. Get your tinfoil hats out. In my research, typically this last line that says, "You've left and found my tomb, and now your souls will die." Okay, so typically where I see this get referenced is that people say, you get here, and then you're supposed to go left, and then you go left here, right? My problem with that is that it's after the line in the poem that describes this room, right? And we'll for the sake of clarity, let me go back through this and point at it as we go. I need to get back to the poem over here so I can refresh my memory. Where'd you go? There it is. Okay, so we've got the Sararak establishes himself as a jerk. Then we have go back to the tormentor or through the arch. and the second great hall you'll discover. Both those lead here. Okay, so we're proceeding in sequence. We'll see. You guys will see that the numbers are going up on this. Okay, if shun green, which is again we're here, shun green, but use the black. The black will lead here, which actually leads here. The red, it tells us to use, leads here, which is going to get us our ring, which we have to use here to get through here. So now we have our ring to get through this doorway. The keys, no, I'm sorry. It tells us about the pit traps, the fall. So we go from here, and then immediately tells us to take the wall, or take the pit. Then the next hint is about keys. So we get our false ending, no keys. We get here, we see a key. Okay, so we got our key. We got half our key. Or we've got our whole key here. We found this key that we're told is important, and then we don't really have anything else to go off of. So we keep going forward. Then we reach the trembling hands, and what will maul? Okay. Then, actually, the maul is a little bit out of place here with this scheme because it's kind of behind this. But if we find the true false kind of includes this plug beyond the door. So we'll say generously that, you know, maybe this is supposed to be. So we have this mauling from the juggernaut, right? If we find the false, we find the true, and into the columned hall we come. And there the throne that's key and keyed. Oops. So there the hall that's key and keyed. Okay, so now we're here, and then Iron Visitor. So what's left? What's left? We get here, and then we're left with one line that says, "You've left and found my tomb, and now your souls will die." So here's a tinfoil hat moment. I think that there was something that happened here, and I guess I'll come back to that later on when we actually get to that section of the dungeon. But keep a pin in that because everyone else I've seen, the left and left is interpreted as this. But I think that's wrong. I think it is telling us when we go through here, we have to turn to the left wall, and then we have to leave the second key, I think. I'm not sure if so. I think something is missing based on this over here, and we'll get back to that a little bit later. So we're back to the describing this first hallway where we're getting through the poem. Okay, so now that we're through the poem, the poison pit traps. Let's see here. Now that we're through there, yeah, the poison pit traps. So these pit traps do an average of 33 damage if you fail your save, as opposed to instantly killing you. The instant kill would have been bad for him for this conversion, which is why we're going to do the reducing. More details on that, unless they use a if they use a 7th level spell or higher to heal. So that can be certain resources, or if you have a character who's actually a very high level character, they could technically cast heal spells to reverse it. The siren in the grotto can also help. We're going to give her a actual function other than just kind of being an arm candy once you get her. The terrible original layout. Oh yeah, so the at no point in time from the original writing has the organization of the writing been improved. So it's a mess, straight up. It's a mess. The number of problems that exist with the the locations of text. So this number 4, the descriptive text for other sections is all over the hallway, all over other entries for this hallway. It's pretty obvious the numbering was applied after this was written by somebody else, and it was never restructured to match that numbering pattern. So that's part of the issue with this module, and it's part of why I think it's hard to run, because it's not well organized. My best practice for this dungeon is actually to prepare your own document with information, all the information from the module that's relative to that location, located at that location. So that way you have a full reference document in one place for each location, which is a pain, but it's very much worth it because there's way too many things that are easy to forget, and you probably need a cheat sheet of like, oh yeah, if they try to go ethereal, then they have to worry about demons, and then blah blah blah, and then any other changes you've made. So it's keep that with your sheets that you keep their passive perceptions on. That said, there's not enough for me there to legally try to justify producing a fix where I would like reorganize and structure that and like produce. There's just not enough. There's not enough legal justification for it. I would get in trouble, so I'm not going to do that. That said, hey Wizards, if you want me to do the next conversion for you, sure, shameless plug, why not? But I'm not gonna do it personally, but it needs to be done. So hey Wizards, if you're not gonna get me to do it, somebody needs to actually structure this like they care, and they're not just gonna resubmit their first draft for their final project 10 years later, because that's what we're doing here. It's kind of embarrassing. This is number 5. So room number 4. Sorry, this is 4. We're on 4. That was still the hallway. Number 4, the mechanical sort of design with the trap and the chest in the wall is meant to lure curious players in. It also has some things that are meant to obviously confuse the players and make sure that they don't feel safe anywhere, and establish that early on. Again, making sure the players are doing what the module can. The module is doing what it can to establish a caution in the players early on. The last bit of note on this, it was confusing, I know, for myself, because there's a secret pit, and it's not reflected in this image at all. It's reflected in this image here, where you have this second pit that's by the 4 here. It's not technically a trap by the module's own internal argument. So that way you don't have to argue with players, because it's already done for you in the module, but it definitely feels very cheeky. There is a line of text about a crack, which I initially thought was connected to like this somehow. So it's just saying that you can see a crack under the. I think it's saying that you can see a crack under the door here at the lead into the gargoyle area. Because it says a true seeing spell reveals a tiny rectangular gap where the door meets the floor. Maybe that's just that's what the true seeing spell. So maybe that's. I don't know. I honestly can't tell. It's not clear in the module text what's going on with that, so I have no idea. Okay, so I can't tell if my camera's still goofing up here or not. All right, we're just gonna leave it alone. I guess it's messed up forever, and my face in this video is gonna be making derpy faces because technical issues, I guess. Let's see here. Totally distracted by that. Yeah, so not very helpful, very confusing. On to number 5 with the archway here. First arch, no real tweaks here. Just suggestion for running it: use your player's innate understanding of like mobile phone apps or like children's toys to convey progress via like progress and resetting via like flashing lights. If you just use like basic logic like that, I think you'll be able to convey the information enough that the players will be like, oh, okay, I kind of understand. So just use something. I mean, don't give them more hints than they need, but at least indicating that something is happening, I think, is probably good form. Yes, the devil face, the most iconic TPK fame, probably the reason everyone knows this dungeon. Don't tip your hand on it. Don't use the watered down suggested version of the DMG magic item guide. Don't give away what it does with the DC 20 Arcana check, for the love of God. That is not a hard check. If a character is able to fight the boss in this game, a DC 20 Arcana check is not hard. Not hard at all. Do not give it away. Don't. It's really easy to run the Sphere of Annihilation. So here's how it works. If you take anything, I just need another prop here. I just need another prop. Piece of paper. I have this piece of paper. This piece of paper is our portal. If I put anything past this barrier, it just doesn't come back at all. Whatever it was, it's just gone. So if I put a pencil in here, the pencil just vanishes after that point. It's perfectly removed. Same thing with a body part. If they put their finger in, they don't feel pain. It just vanishes. It ceases to exist. And the blood that is connected to the capillaries that are now vanishing and not attached to anything, it just sprays into the emptiness. It's not like sucked out, but it just sprays because there's no pressure. So it just sprays endlessly from a pressurized system into that non-pressurized system. Non-system. It's really simple. Don't do damage. Just disintegrate anything you stick into it. It's really simple. And players can come up with some fun stuff with this. It's actually really cool. Like, I had a player who stuck half of a crowbar in, and then they were trying to come up with all the things they could do with half of a crowbar. Like, you can use this to shape items and things. Like, it's not entirely useless. It is interesting. So, don't cheat the green devil face. Let the thing be the thing. Let it be awesome. Let it just instantly disintegrate anything that it touches. That said, only other hint is if they stick some body part, just let them know that they start getting faint relatively quickly. Don't give it away too soon, but you know. I have had a player stick their head in, and the way I narrated it, I can't replicate immediately offhand, but I basically made it sound like his brain goes interrupted, and then they knew based on the description what was happening before the guy's head he fell back out. It was, his head missing from here because he went head first. So he took the top of his brain out and spazzed out for a few seconds before he twitched and fell back to the ground. And that was the end of that character. And man, people got really excited. I mean, there was some upsetness, but there wasn't any hard feelings. And the people all were like, "Oh, I didn't think I should stick anything in there." Yeah, listen to your buddies. Stick something that's less important than your head in a hole. So yeah, it was a good lesson. And this is again why I say give people more than one PC. Give them an extra PC so they can do dumb shit. It's a good part of the experience. I feel like if you can't make any dumb mistakes in the Doom of Horrors, you're probably not having as much fun with it as you could. So don't give away the devil face. Let it be awesome. That's just my thoughts. 7. The Box of Suffering, aka you didn't figure out the puzzle, so you're punished. This is a teaching moment. Uh, it's meant to offer some opportunities. It also offers the escape route as the it offers early access to the escape route from the dungeon that is available through 13. As if you don't come through this way and you don't realize you can go through this wall here, um, there's no real way back out of the dungeon. So this is important. The let's see here, boxes. Yeah, I'm just gonna call it the box, the Forsaken. What is it? The Forsaken box or something. Forsaken prison. Yeah, the box of suffering is accurate. This box it's not very complicated. Again, it's one of those things where it doesn't age very well, especially in a system where you have so many people with flying or access to immunity to falling that the risk of people dying to it's pretty low. Um, so just to make it, because this was something that I was definitely confused about, and it took me a lot of actual like pointing and looking and pointing and looking to be like, oh, okay. In order to escape the prison box, the levers have to be moved up. This is a closed environment, and then once those levers are moved up, there's a hole that appears in the ceiling of the box, the prison, that is then gives access to this crawl space. That crawl space goes past a plug, which is accessed to 13, and it's really easy to see the plug from the side in the room, but it's really hard to see as you're crawling down this dark, shitty passage to the hole in the side of this pit. That's a one-way door. So this is not the most confusing section, but I just wanted to make a few points on it because I know I was initially confused in reading it. Yeah, yeah, no, okay, that's all my notes on that. All right, so number 8. Number 8, we have the gargoyle lair. They're coming through the walls! Yes, the Tormentor path requires PCs to break through a wall that has been plastered over a breakable wall to reveal a door. In some ways, I guess you could say this module really does let players live out their fantasies. To make this path more confusing, it does not get a number on the map here, so you might be looking for it under 4. It's not under 4, it's under 8. Kind of. It's actually really under 3. The description is in the 3rd section. Let's see here. It doesn't get it doesn't get it's not numbered. It's quickly glossed over in the main hallway where you are likely to miss it when you're looking at other parts of the descriptions for the players as they ask questions. This path leads to the first combat in the dungeon, which is the most underwhelming monster in the 5e conversion, which is here to offer a very slight HP tax and some cool bling attached to in the form of a necklace that you're going to rip apart immediately. Which also includes a clue with a hidden compartment with no DC to find in either. So this is a gimme. A few things here. The original monster had twice as many. It had 6 attacks and it had like 4 HP more, so it was still a little bit more, but it had more HP in a time when the HP would have been less bloated. So you had less HP bloat, and it had more HP and 6 attacks per round. So I think it would have been actually a pretty dangerous monster. And as for the hidden thing, I think it probably would have been under the general 1/3 chance of finding the hidden clue. But since clues are scarce in this dungeon, I don't really see a significant reason to try to hide this clue if they come this way. I just give it to them. The clue here is going to tell us to search the gold orb in the next hallway, where the gems will go from the necklace. And it also tells us not to use the archway, because we will wend. And wending is defined as an indirect, slow, and inefficient route, which is very accurate of being teleported naked outside the dungeon. Very accurate. Definitely not the best way to get to the end of the dungeon. Teleported naked to the start. So yeah, the hidden door complex, I don't have any adjustments really. I have one adjustment to the bolts. Just for simplicity's sake for the doors, because this is something that there's less out there as far as resources than there could be. So in order to make the doors, the descriptions in it doesn't tell you what the door has, it just tells you how it works, which is kind of weird to me. I think it'd been easier to just kind of make it up if you had the other point. So I did my best to interpret them. So for A, when we're moving through these series of hidden doors, for A, we're going to say there's hidden handles on top of the wall. And I'd almost rather just like give players these relatively easily and then just let them kind of play around with them. That's, I feel like, more of the fun that's meant to be had from this section. This is a fun house area of the dungeon. It's meant to be kind of fun. So put the hidden handles on top of the wall for A. The wall rotates when pushed on either side for B. For C, we're going to do hidden handles on the bottom of the wall. D, we have no handles, just pressure applied to raise while pushing up. So we just have to push in and just do that. Hidden handles on the top allow the doors to open in. For E, we have hidden handles on the top of the doors allow the doors to open inward like normal double doors. So we have doors that do this. And then for F, we have no handles, just pressure to push to the left and open. So we just have to get it to pop back and slide. For the bolts, good lord, this 50% thing and then random, just fire 1 bolt per chamber per round with a creature in it, and do the bolts on high initiative and make them resisted for half as opposed to entirely. Keep in mind, these threats are not a hazard to 5e characters. They were not much of a threat to first edition characters, and not much farther in this book from here in the original module. There's points where Gary's notes basically say, yeah, this isn't really to hurt the players, it's just to kind of annoy them, eat away a little bit at their HP. So that is literally what a bunch of this stuff is. It's there to eat, like just pick, like a little pick away at their health and their resources. We need to up that a little bit if we're going to have it do anything meaningful because of the bloat from more recent additions on player power. So we're going to just give it a little more damage, just let them do some extra damage, make it simple for yourself, and easier to run entirely. So that's a super simple, easy fix or alteration, and does not change anything really substantially. The second hall, God, in a word, this is the biggest pain in the ass in this dungeon. This hallway is a nightmare to deal with players for, because of all the things, and they're all trying to check this and that. It really encourages them splitting up for some reason. By the time they're here, I'd think they wouldn't be splitting up, but by the time they do get here, they typically start spreading all over the place looking at this stuff because they're just curious at this point. And typically, I feel like their guard gets lowered by the fact they haven't been wiped by anything else yet. So the second hall, um, do not use the perception checks for secret doors and illusions. Do not do the perception checks. Do not give the illusion checks. Just let them explore the hallway. Don't make them roll. Just let them explore it. And if they figure out one of the holes or one of the orbs is, an illusion, then they're going to start feeling all the orbs, and they're going to find they'll find the passages, and it won't be a problem. So I would leave this well alone. I wouldn't. I don't think there's no needs to step in here. Don't give them that gimme. Just let them find it. Let them have the fun of realizing it, rather than just passive perception scanning it out of the environment. Okay, so we have 11, the three-armed bandit, or the three-armed / one-armed bandit. The optional side treasure from this chamber here can make life much easier for players later on. It does require us to defeat the gargoyle from 8 and to then figure out this puzzle in 11. I don't have any fixes for this. The only real note I have is, in order to make it easier for players who might not be thinking in the concept of putting gems in slots, which is something that would have been way more in the culture at the time, but not now. If it's not something that players immediately jump on, just mention, if they already have all those gems, that they do seem like they match in size and shape. This should be, yeah. So in my notes, this would have been something that would have been obvious at the time. So a small handicap here, I think, is actually the good sport move, as opposed to leaving it as is. To help players understand to help players with the gem, I just give it. I describe it like a D12, and then I say a face cracks every time they use it. And I would actually just describe it as something else. Don't use the gem of seeing, since if they look up a gem of seeing and they see what that does, they're going to start. So don't use that. Just call it something else. And, say it's a seeing crystal. Say it's a seeing crystal and it has, limited uses. There you go. Perfect. They don't know what a seeing crystal is, then, oh, cool. Well, it does cool things. And yeah, I would skip the gem of seeing, because it doesn't conform with the current one. So I think that's a confusion point. Trapdoors. That's these bad boys. And there's not just these ones. There's a few more in other parts of the dungeon. There is a change here that I don't understand why it was made. This trap now makes an attack against the character's armor class, rather than the player saving against a magical trap. I think the other would be better, frankly. Like, for 5e, I don't know why not. I can't tell if they... I don't understand the reasoning for it. Realistically, the damage also on these attacks probably should be increased by like a d8 if it's going to be doing anything kind of meaningful. The other thing is the AC, having it target AC instead of a save, further punishes people who've lost their gear. I don't know if that's intentional. I don't think it is, based on the original module, so I kind of think that's an unsporting design. I don't think that their alteration for making it. So I would definitely consider, if you're running this, making it a save for players. All right, let's see here. All right, I guess if this is going to be busted, I'm just going to take it down. I don't know what's going on with my camera. I'll have to find out what's going on with that later. That's a bummer. Okay, well, if this video blows up, I guess I'll reshoot it if it looks like shit. All right, so the three chests. This room has some pretty crazy implications. The skeleton. This is something I realized in play, and it doesn't make a lot of sense. The skeleton in the room is teleported into the room. It says so in the description, but the snakes aren't, which means the snakes are kept in the box continuously. Which means if your players cook the box on a suspicion and they just set the box on fire, you're going to have a snake barbecue before you get there. And that definitely happened, and it was hilarious. So keep that in mind. The barely hidden plug in the back of the room here behind the chest, it's literally like a perception 10, which at that point I don't know why. I mean, like that's DC. That's a DC of perception that's like within Stevie Wonder's capability of discovering. So I don't think that's a worthwhile inclusion. I would just give it to people for free if you're going to put it at a DC 10. All right, so we have the Evil Chapel. Let's see here. The poison in the pews is okay since it can give the poisoned condition for 48 hours. We are going to treat this like the other poisons for removal and make it harder to remove that poisoned condition unless they use a high level spell. So good idea. Just a small note on that. Another note I made, because it has come up almost every time I have run this, and it's a pain to actually calculate out each time. The coinage in the benches weighs 360 pounds. You are welcome. 360 pounds of coins, and that's it. You don't need to know more. Just kidding. So to upgrade this room, I recommend upgrading the spells cast from the altar to 7th level from 3rd. These are one-use things. Granted, they are AoE, but they require, again, we're requiring some affirmative action on the player's parts. And I think this is a more interesting part if we upscale the damage considerably. Again, a fireball or a lightning bolt in the original edition would have been pretty strong. It's not impressive by the time we're probably playing in this module with characters. So again, just to keep it a little more interesting, I think we need to spike the damage a little bit more. And this is an area where we can easily spike the damage without adjusting anything crazy. So I think this is a good place to do it. I do the DCs on these 7th level spells of lightning and fireball, lightning bolt and fireball for DC 17. The archway over here, the orange archway. This is a potentially great bit of fun. I think some players might not be very mature about it. However, I can tell you from personal experience, if you have a role player type character, a role player type of player who really likes the acting, you're in for a treat if they step through that portal. You are in for a treat. So it can be really fun, actually. It was we had a lawful good man become a chaotic evil, uh, like a lawful good paladin became a chaotic evil like psychopath, and it was hilarious to see the player uh, do both of them simultaneously. So that was a pretty cool that was a pretty cool experience. Definitely, probably one of the best things that's happened to me in running the Tomb of Horror. So I recommend it. Uh, the wall slot. I describe this as a small hole in the wall until it is actually closely inspected. Um, in the original, we had a 1 in 3 chance of detecting this. Now they have a DC 10 perception check. I'd say split the difference and just make them search the area if you're going to make it that simple. I think we're adjusting for modern sensibilities, assuming that people probably won't be forced to just search until they give up is probably better. So this is fine. Just a note, any magical ring will work in that slot. It doesn't have to be the one from the chest. So if somebody has a magic ring and they stick it in there, it's gone, unfortunately. But the door will open as the stone gate rises. It. Ah, yes. Okay, so just as a reminder, so these pit traps, they are still filled with poisonous spikes. It's easy to forget that as we go, but I can't recommend any changes to this area because we don't want to mess with it. Um, the locked oaken door. Okay, man, this is a this conversion for this area is so disappointing. It gives a DC 10 athletics check to overcome the hazard. That's it. The damage is actually downgraded from the original module for reasons I can't even begin to explain. This trap, as is in the conversion, has 0 tension and needs very serious number buffs. We're going to make this a strength save, not an ability check. So no guidance and no expertise. No. We're going to make this a strength save. When it is triggered, the trap will go at initiative 20, not 10, and the terrain will become difficult terrain, in which creatures without climb speeds will have disadvantage on strength and dexterity saves. And finally, now that we've imposed disadvantage on saves for most of the characters in this trap, we don't actually need to modify the DC, as it is now done at disadvantage. We've gotten rid of expertise. So this trap now poses a mild threat for a disorganized group. But it's now actually interesting and potential, and we probably will have people kind of pulling each other back. So way better. That is a horribly, horrible, horrible conversion. Horrible conversion. Absolutely trash. Okay. Magical. Okay, so yeah. All right. So magical secret door. I got no comments on this. It's pretty. It's a pretty fair conversion. 18. The false ending, as I hinted earlier, the removal of some of the theatrics from some of the earlier parts of the module, I think, has given the delivery in this, the delivery of the false ending, probably an unintended vibe that doesn't really go with modern society too well, or modern culture in our games. As originally designed, I think this was pretty playful in intent, and is kind of meant to be like, reinforcing that evil jerk who's kind of toying with you. think there are. It's a previous gameplay. Oh, okay. All right. Let me look for this. There's a. All right. False ending. Okay. Yeah, there's something. There was some wording in here. Where did I see it? Oh yeah, it was like the whole bit with all right, so when you're running this ending here where you're supposed to be simulating that this is the final boss, uh, the crypt is the home to a false lich. Between the strikes, the creature will gesture with its hands as if it's readying a spell. Um, we make this mouth, and then in parentheses it tells the dungeon master to roll dice, so fake rolling dice, and then shake your head ruefully. So you're supposed to be like, oh no, this fight isn't going well. So like the whole thing is there's like there's a whole bunch of like clowning around with this, and I think this is meant to be much more of a almost tongue-in-cheek laugh with your friends. And I don't think it's meant to actually ever trick anyone. I think it's meant to be obvious. Um, the other thing, oh yeah, the other thing is we very funny. The gold couch here is worth 50,000 gold, but it's important. They very importantly noted it cannot be moved or damaged by any means. So there's a big gold couch there. You can't move it. It's bolted down. You can't cut it up because we know you're going to try to cut it up. That's too funny. All right, so this is maybe the worst offender in this entire tournament for wasting time is 19. Holy water, cleric man. We have a major tournament hangover here, and it's a doozy. We have a room that is all designed. It's literally filled with crap that's all there in a description to waste your time. After that, we have uh, a choice. In order to get something we are required to get, and it's been clearly indicated it is required to get, um, because they don't really make it clear. Like, I've never had a player just try to reach into the acid and just eat it. But it seems like you should probably like outright die if you try to do that. I can't tell because otherwise, why wouldn't you just reach in and just take the burn? Because otherwise, we are forced to choose between finding among the bric-a-brac that fills this room and like all this like broken pottery and stuff. We're gonna find the means to move all the acid out of this giant vat, or that we have our choice between emptying an enormous vat with improvised tools and a cumulative 1% grope chance for the key. For fairy's sake, roll a d4 and waste that many hours in game time and give them the fucking key. There's nothing here that's interesting except for maybe them but again, it's literally them picking up a piece of like a shell, pottery shell, and dunk. Like, it doesn't matter what we come down to, it's gonna be roll a d4 and waste some time in game. There's no fixing this, I don't think. Um, it would be really cool to have a puzzle to solve rather than just this complicated time solving or time wasting equation that we were given. However, with the poem, I think we need to be careful about any changes, and I'd probably leave it alone. I mean, if you wanted to put a puzzle in the Tomb of Horrors and you wanted to do your own little tweak, here's the place to do it, please. For the love of God, put the key in a puzzle rather than just a vat of painful slowness. Then we move on to our big pit of obsoleteness down here at the bottom with 20. This pit is probably the most poorly aged thing in this entire dungeon. Even more than the pit traps of poison that's no longer a threat. This is the worst. We have so much wide access to alternative movement options via race, spells, and all kind of gear. This is this pit is so obsolete. There's so fixing it is pretty hard. Best things we can do here is we're going to make the spikes, the launch spikes from this pit, auto hit, and we're going to cover the entire pit with an anti-magic field. So anybody who tries to fly or use magic to jump or any other magic cheating to get past this pit, we're just going to drop them right on top of the spikes. And I think that actually brings it up to probably more modern, at least in the fact that it will at least maybe slow the players down for a few minutes. So I'm going to say do that. I don't think it's a fair upgrade to a thing that no longer poses any hazards any longer. So yeah, I do that. Also, trivia tidbit. The art for the 3rd edition, if I'm not mistaken, actually has this pit going the extra 10 feet to the hallway here. So in one version of the art, do I have it here? I do. You can see, oh, I lied a little bit. It's extended 1 block further, my mistake. You can see it's 3 blocks here as opposed to 2 blocks here. Weird, huh? And I mean, like, all the rest of the conversion is extremely, extremely faithful, so it's very strange. Very, very strange. Very strange indeed. Okay, so this is... Alright, so next room we have the Tilted Experience. This room has another tournament hangover. Where we have we're encouraged to waste time collecting treasure and burn time in our tournament against the other players. That said, this room is really underwhelming in practice for several reasons. The lack of the floors, the lack of inertia for the floor once it starts is kind of disappointing. Not to mention the save to avoid falling against a singular point of damage and scuffing your knee. You're scuffing your boots as you fall is a DC 10 dexterity save. Which makes me wonder, why are we doing it at all? Other than you just didn't want to make this room painful for players. But it almost makes it worse because it's so meaningless to track that pitiful amount of damage on a high-level character. It's almost more annoying to actually have to, like, if we were in pen and paper, it's more of a pain in the butt to shorten the life of my character sheet by adjusting my health 1 point. I'd rather take 10 points of health damage, because at least then it's worth noting. So anyway, yeah, I don't think this is very well designed. Converted originally, again, since we have this backdrop of the fact that this is a tournament hangover, I think we can make some adjustments. To make this room a hint of the threat and not a joke from a design perspective, we're going to need some serious overhaul. Let's go. DC for dexterity save is 20, not 10, 20. The floor is a wild, crazy floor. Let's just make this not a joke. So let's bring it up. It's a DC 20. We'll keep the damage at 1. It doesn't have to do a lot of damage. We just need them to be tripping. Because when they fall, there's a risk that they yank the thing and kill themselves with the green slime, which is really the actual hazard. We're just kind of setting them up for failure. Once the 50% chance of the triggering of the floor is active, continue the rocking until the PCs abandon the room for a round or everyone there has been prone for a round. Don't do the 50 because otherwise it just doesn't kick off. It doesn't kick off enough and it doesn't make the players save. The save is too easy. So it needs to make players make more saves, and the saves need to be harder for this to be really in doing anything at all. Tiny bit of history and background on this so we can upgrade the slimes appropriately. This slime hazard has been woefully underserved by the conversion. This used to be a potential insta-kill as opposed to doing like D10 of damage. We're going to make this hazard more dangerous in line with the thing, but we're going to give the players a little bit more of a chance to intervene than they would have had in the original module. If a creature is coded in slime, so what would have pulled the thing onto ourselves, we would have immediately been dissolved before. So instead of immediately dissolving, we're going to take 3d10 damage. We're going to take damage when we get hit and at the start of our turns, and when we do that, we'll save. Furthermore, we're going to make it scary by bringing back what it was that made green slime so scary, which is the fact that it can dissolve magic items. So the damage done by the slime cannot be healed, and each time a creature is damaged this way, it must make a DC 20 con save to be saved versus being turned into green slime. This is an instant, permanent effect and cannot be dispelled. Sunlight or any effect that cures disease, and any effect that deals cold or fire damage or radiant damage, destroys a patch of green slime. I had a player get turned into slime, and then his buddies disintegrated him, which was kind of hilarious. It was unintentional, but yeah, they failed their save, got turned into green slime, and then his buddies disintegrated him. There was some laughter there. But yeah, I would do that. This makes it so it's not quite the complete you're screwed because you had a curtain fall on you that it was originally, but it should introduce a potential tension as players try to scramble to save the person. So good stuff there, I think. Siren. Okay, so we're going to upgrade the DC for the mists to 20 because this is one of a few things that actually keeps the this a hazard. This is they may or may not go here. They may or may not be affected. It's not a bad. It's okay. I upgrade it. We're gonna say the Siren. If they save her, Siren can cure the poison health reductions during a long rest while accompanying the party. So players will be able to recover their health damage from poison as long as Siren is there for long rests. I think that's a pretty fair reversal of that, and helps set the players up for success versus the challenges we've added to the module for their experience. Okay, so we are hour and a half in. Let's keep going. Let's see here. So section 23. 23. Which one is this again? Why was this confused? Yeah. All right, so this section is confusing, so I'll rephrase it as such. A fake door hides a secret door behind a facade of stone. This doorway opens into a passage where the players are then supposed to immediately search for a hidden trapdoor in the floor that leads to a narrow passage to the way forward rather than death. For fairies' sakes. The Juggernaut gas save DC, we're going to increase to 25 because this was originally no save. And we also have a bunch of player races that are resistant or don't breathe. So we have some creatures that will just be immune to this. We are going to make it high. Any creature that saves will be drowsy and needs to make concentration checks to sustain spells. And there's a reason we're going to do this. This trap is super important to the original design. The timing and distance in most cases, in most scenarios, the players come in, they get knocked out. Basically, I did the math, 3/4 of the time, the players survive. 3/4 of the time, the thing comes close, but doesn't quite come close enough to crushing the entire party. Which means if you survive it, which you have a 3 in 4 chance of doing, so odds are very good you do survive, even though you fucked up and put yourself in this bad spot, chances are you survive. And the reason why is because this is the end of where this is no longer kid stuff. From here on, there will be no second chances. This is the last second chance anyone gets. So the puzzle, the trap, gives you that second chance, but it doesn't give you 100% of that second chance. It just gives you most of it. And at this point, if you go through here, you'll know we might not get another chance, and you won't. This is the last time you actually get real second chances. So this is a good indicator for the shift in like things go. There's a dramatic shift in danger to the party from prior to this point to now. This is dangerous territory we're entering here. So we're gonna go with that. So basically, it ends up being the Juggernaut advances and the party hex keeps just in time. Since this is going to be potentially learning, and I'd like to recreate the dramaticness. If we increase it to 25, the guy who makes the save should be able to pull everyone to safety, even if they might have woken up in time. He'll still be the hero. So I think that's pretty good. Okay, and now we have probably the most embarrassing thing I've ever seen in like a publicly produced for consumption document. The adamantine door. You shall not pass. Players, you shall not pass. I mean, really, you won't, because in the most hilarious and glaring of flaws in the conversion, and possibly in all of the D&D materials I'm aware of, they installed the impenetrable one-way doors backwards. So they only can open from the east, the side you're not on when you get to this door. I don't know how. I mean, this. I know this was an oversight. I actually do have a theory as to what happened, which is going to come up in just a little bit. But this is. I'm just going to joke and say they figured they could save 5e players from being disappointed with the boss if they couldn't get to it. For clarity, these are one-way doors that have slots in them that you're supposed to know swords would go into. There's not a lot of. This is another one of those historical, cultural gaps. You might need to actually give your players a hint on this one because there's no reason to indicate. I mean, best thing you can probably do about just straight up telling them is tell them it, dimensions, and just base your dimensions around a sword. And just, if they get it, and if they don't, just, I'd give them this one. I don't generally recommend that, but this is a derpy thing that just doesn't align with current. Like nobody sticks a sword as a key in a door anymore. If this was common, it's not anymore. So Yes, let's see here. Keep going on. Oh yeah, so it's super important that these doors are one way, because after this point they make retreat much more difficult, and they might. The fact that they're unopenable is important for a separate trap ahead, even though the trap doesn't really factor them in. It's kind of weird. We'll get to there. But anyway, hey wizards, I promise if you put me on your next conversion, I won't put your doors on backwards. Just throwing that out there. Next we have 25. So we have the columned hall. There is a colorful chamber here, and along with colorful experiences to be found. Overall, I'd say this is a pretty faithful recreation. A few notes on running. The room notably has a breeze, uh, uh, but it's listed under the floating trap, so you might miss that in your description. But there is a noticeable breeze in the room. So that is something that should be described to players early on. That they're going into this room that's closed, and all of a sudden there's a breeze. So that should be some kind of that's important information for players potentially. And then also important to note, because it's not as clear as it could be in the text, and it might be easy to miss, especially since there's a lot going on in this room running it. Both devil heads have the same suction factor going on. So whichever one a creature starts closer to, if they start floating, is the one they're going to end up going through, if intervention isn't done. Also, for some reason, there is no drift speed. There's no floating speed that's been assigned since first edition. Like, it wasn't there in first edition, I understand, but it hasn't been assigned since, and I think that has been some oversight. So we're going to say 15 feet per round float. At the bottom of your turn or initiative, whichever it ends up being for how you're doing the group or whatever. But yeah, we're going to say you float at 15 feet per round towards the exit. No major changes in this room. We aren't going to alter the perception DC for the throne, but as we mentioned earlier, we're going to make sure we provide that art from both first and fifth edition edition versions to show that plaque on the throne, so that the players can just see it and they can do their own thinking. So we're going to do that. The last bit of note, and this is kind of funny. So this devil had 26. This is my favorite trap in this dungeon because it only kills a frustrated player, and like there's only like a very, very specific scenario that has to happen. The player has to make it through the dungeon, and they have to not they have to have not interacted with this green skull back, the green devil face in the first hall, to not know what it does. They need to now know what that first one does. Second, they need to make it all the way here and get affected by the floating and then get ejected through that. Once they get ejected and they lose all their stuff and they are now naked floating, they need to somehow be able to stop floating. And then once they manage to stop floating, they have to then decide to leap back into the mouth they came out of here to go get their gear, instantly killing themselves. So that is like the most crazy setup and payoff for a trap. But that is what I am here for. I'm waiting for that day because I'm gonna laugh. I'm gonna have uncontrollable laughter that I'm gonna have to hold back for probably some stranger who I don't know, because I won't be able to explain to them. You don't understand. I've been waiting for years for someone like you to come along and show me it was possible. Thank you. I've been waiting. But yeah, no. So it's gonna be a good day when it happens. It's best trap in the dungeon. Too funny. Yeah, a lot of factors in there. Probably I'll never see it happen, but fingers crossed. Okay, so we have for 26. This one, the one with the yeah, because there's two 26s. I forget. I knew where I was going with it though. As you saw, 26. The one on the right there. This one we're going to have the and this is something that bugged me. Here we have like a false boss that can be triggered by trying to remove a gem that's been hidden in its head. A gem hidden in a creature's eye socket. So it has the highest perception check in the module is to find the crappy treasure trigger for a less than impressive boss fight. And that's the thing with the highest perception check in the game. Okay, if you say so. Disappointing whoever did that. I hang your pen in shame, my friend. Disappointing. Yeah, hilariously one of the only actual high perception checks in the dungeon, and it's a trigger for a modest fight with a treasure ring that does little except make an unnecessary fight a little bit easier because we don't need that ring anymore to get through here. So it's useless. The only thing it helps us for is the fight with the Afridi if we pick a fight with an Afridi for no reason. Yes, and 27. Okay, so this one I actually have quite a bit on. The Chamber of Hopelessness. As we can see in our original art here, as well as in the 3rd edition art, there's no picture. There's no graphics showing the image here. Okay, but wait. In our 5th edition one, we do. Now, this is backwards. We can see clearly here that this is where the fountain is in this room. And let's get the art. Let's get that fancy art where we can show the picture from the original art. Grab that real quick here. Oh, we're still a few away. So many in that chamber. Here we go. And you'll excuse me for having this sideways here from the module here, but we have here we have the fountain with the door that's on the, we know this door is on the south side, with the fountain to the right. But now we have the fountain to the left of where the door is. Also, we can see that this hallway has sort of been added. In my understanding from this, there is actually a doorway that goes across here from the pictures. It seems that there was an adjustment. Where is it? Is it on here? It doesn't. I'm thinking this looks like this was added as an afterthought. As we can see, in the original art here that this chamber was added on, which makes sense with why it looks this way. This doesn't make sense with how this looks. It makes sense if we have this historical this past context. So I'm pretty sure, based on this, that this is meant to be more of a this hallway should be this chamber, and I think it's just kind of an unfortunate artifact that has been kind of forgotten and sort of mixed up in time. So yeah, as we can see, yeah, we've reached this is the maximum tinfoil hat section of the video, and my guess as to why the adamantine door is reversed. If we look closely at the image from the original fountain, or the original room, we can see the fountain is depicted on the east wall of 27A. But we look at the map from 5E conversion, what's that? The fountain is on the west wall. How did that happen? So wild guess here, but I'm thinking the person who was converting the module might have had the images from the original, and either through an act of carelessness managed to get it wrong, or somehow they might have gotten a mirrored image, which could have been done from somebody who was doing this for play testing or something, and they could have gotten a mirrored image and gotten it flipped that way. That seems possible. Or to just been, I'm trying to be generous and not saying that they can't figure out their left from the right. And it seems mean, so we're not gonna assume that that's what we're going to assume. There were some other factors that happened in here. The fact that this room is mixed up with the fact that the adamantine door is backwards. I think they might have worked backwards in this room from this image. So tinfoil hat, that's my theory, because frankly both are pretty glaring mistakes. Obviously, this latter one is more forgivable than the door, the entryway, which is not. But yeah, that's the craziness with that. So I think that those two getting mixed up are related. I would put some money down on that. Further important to note, the defensive weapons for the shields and the swords that guard the exit from this place, they are not magical and don't register as magical weapons and cannot be wielded as such. It's important to note, because this is not explicit, like it is explicit, but it's kind of nuanced and you have to read between the lines a little bit on this. So if a creature tries to leave the chamber of sadness, we're going to call it, they take 16 attacks per round from the swords, which is pretty brutal and actually has a decent chance of killing many PCs, even with the current HP. There's one thing that probably should be mentioned. Swords are probably going to get a surprise round, which means there's a possibility they might get 32 attacks off on a creature before it gets to act. So this is actually this is a very deadly trap if you properly run it. So do take note of that and don't miss an opportunity to destroy somebody who walks through a doorway with 32 cuts. The secret wondrous foyer. Oh, man. Okay, so now we're into the foyer area. So this is down here. We've gotten past we've gotten past this room. This room, I don't have a lot of comments because this is actually really golden. Everything here is great. There's not a lot there's no conversion changes to make or improve. This area is confusing, and I think this is actually a gap from the original module, so let's get into it. The Wondrous Foyer is the stage for a few strange and well-considered hazards that invite player annoyance and error. I wouldn't tinker with the antipathy effect on the key. It's fine. This is another tournament hangover that's meant to make people waste time as they run off and backwards in the dungeon and have to chase after other people in the darkness with torches and stuff. And it's meant to split the party or make them waste time. So again, it's fine. It's meant to annoy them. It's fine. Leave it alone. This area is meant to. Next place is so 28 and 29 are considered basically they're separate for some reason, and I don't know why. Um, they're right next to each other. There's no real dividing line. Um, I can't tell if there's something that was. Yeah, see here we see the steps actually going further into the foyer, so I don't know if there was some kind of thoughts on that. I'm thinking there might have. Oh, you know what it is? I'll guarantee it. Now that I'm looking at this, the 28's where the key is. Let's look. Let's look at the art with the key. Where's the key? Here it is. There it is. That's what it is. That's why there's a 28 there. That is funny. That is funny. I just realized this. That's why the 28 is here and the 29. The 28 points to the key. That's a funny thing to realize. So yeah, that 28 is talking about that key. That's hilarious. That is funny because there was no easy way to mark the key on the map there. That's why there's a 28 there and a 29. That's a fun deep dive to realize. That's cool. All right. So we found something out I didn't realize when we started today. Congratulations. Congratulations to me. Even if nobody watches this, I won. It only took me 20 hours of prep to figure out that one tiny little thing. The mastery of the tomb comes at quite a price. So again, this area is interesting. It's a cool trap. I do like it. I'm kind of wondering what's really intended, what's going on with this section, because of the blood trap. I don't know. Maybe this factor's in there somewhere too. Who knows? So the problem is we have this blood trap, right? That if we trigger this blood trap, it's supposed to fill up this area with blood, right? It says it will fill the foyer, which is marked on this as 28, but really, and my understanding has always been, and I've been confused, and this is why, now I understand. So it will fill this area with blood in 20 rounds. Okay? It will fill that area with blood in 20 rounds. So my question is, are the players trapped? Can they not go backwards? Because it's not clear that they cannot return through the chair. I mean, I'm not saying they can go forward, but I mean, they could go through one of those. There is an out. There's an out right there. So they could leave. So I'm not sure why this is worded this way. So we have this foyer that we have this area where it will fill with blood in a really long time. And it seems like it's stretched out with the intention of, again, getting the players to make a mistake like setting the blood on fire and killing themselves with poisonous gas as a result. I think one of two things we need to make a decision when we're running this, and I think one of them is less ideal than the other. So I think one way is the right way or the better way, and I'll explain my reasoning. I think we need to say one of two things. Either the players cannot retreat past this chair they can't retreat out of this area once the blood trap is triggered. But the problem with that is if they need something that they've left behind here, they can't go get it. So I don't think that's a good solution. I think that's a non-solution. And I think the best way we can do it is they can go back, but at the end of that 20 rounds, when this fills with blood, these heads vomit blood and fill the rest of this chamber up immediately. I think that's what we have to do. Otherwise, how many years is it going to take the blood to trickle in to fill this chamber? Since apparently it takes 22 minutes to fill this chamber with blood. Obviously, the volume is very different here and here. So I think we need to have that as a background. I can't necessarily call this I wouldn't necessarily call this an oversight by the original designer, because again, we have that assumption that players are going to try to move forward no matter what. But it is very strange that it has not been addressed since. And the conversion maintains a very strange delineation where if the blood is set on fire and turned poisonous, the characters who are standing here will die, but the ones that are standing just on the other side will not. Weird. And I understand that's in the original material, but there's no reason why, and I don't think they know. They don't have a clear understanding of why. I'm going to say they definitely don't. So I think I have strange feeling about this. I don't know that I would mess around with this. But I mean, it's either no save and you auto die, or you get a relatively low DC 17 con save. I think the only thing I can change that I think I can make for the better easily is kind of bring a little bit of a callback to the previous edition, and the conversion for the blood trap. That the change we're gonna make to that is the purify food and drink effect. We're gonna set the DC to 25, and if you fail, your strength becomes 3 for 24 hours, as opposed to the other effects. This is just to throw back to the original module, and it's a fun nod to how much the module destroyed player character sheets. And it will set them back a little bit on that thing. If they survive, they're probably going to have to delay a day to fight. So that could force people. So it's a good punish. It's a good penalty without actually killing them, I think. So it's not a bad deal. Only major note I have for this chamber is to remember that the gem of trucing will reveal the treasure to be false, which is something I think was easily missed in the notes. 31. This is the doors. The doors. Okay, so the doors. These one-way doors are more of a prank than anything else. And again, we're going to be going right back to that time-wasting mechanic from tournaments. That said, the phasing poisonous pit trap is pretty cheeky, and if a Sararak gets the last laugh and picks up a kill as they lug the loot out over his dead body, that's pretty on point. 32. Okay, so here's where we're going to be talking. We're going to kind of circle right back around to that crazy tinfoil hat theory about my left and found my tomb. So this is the etching we have. This is the sketch we have from the start. Okay, this is our worksheet here. This is actively worked on. This is This is the section we're talking about here. I think this is the left and left. I can't tell what else is going on here. I think it's pretty clear there's some things that are missing. Oh, this looks like this might be the internal temple there. Yeah. But yeah, I think there's some things that are missing because this looks like, again, we're pointing to something here on the wall. Um, this clearly indicates that the keyhole is on the left side, whereas because of where this 32 is, here we have reason to think it's on that far wall right across the way from where we come through. Also in these additions we see there's this sort of gap where we can turn, and that is actually representative not of the that's representative of where the line is where people get destroyed for standing there, if I'm not mistaken. And then you have like the wall that falls back. The rest of these, you can see the path is flush. So I think at some point there were some things lost here, and that's where the left and left is. So that's my theory. The perception check of 15 is really fine because all it wants the player to do is spend some time looking there, and then if they do, the keyhole becomes obvious from my reading of the module. I think that's my reading of the poem. So let me know what you think in the comments if I got that wrong or not. The last bit we have, the crypt. The crypt has the last of the standing in the wrong spot at the end of a countdown timer, quick time events, and which is also the dramatic entry of the final showdown, and has a very limited chance to splatter indecisive characters, assuming they can even open the vault, which requires a combination with no hint to it anywhere in the dungeon. As is, players are expected to guess it randomly, and the best I can do is say there's a lot of 3s in the dungeon, so maybe they will think, huh, 3. That's really it. Other than that, no reason they'd ever get this thing open. Boss notes, it needs more HP. I recommend increasing health by 10% per level of the party. So if you have a 10th level party, give it 100% extra HP. If you have a 5th level party, give it give it 50% extra HP. And I know that sounds like crazy, but it really needs the help. It needs the help. Use the anti-magic. Oh yeah, so when you're running the boss, use the anti-magic lair action as much as possible. That should be your go-to option. Hit them with anti-magic. Don't let them use that. And then the other one is use the healing prevention. Forget the other one. The other one's trash. Use your legendary action, especially your first turn. Okay. Use your legendary action to use Vile Curse to set up a creature with disadvantage on the first turn versus Soul Trap. Ideally, what's going to happen is you're going to roll initiative, and then one of the players is probably going to go before a Sararak. So at the end of that player who goes right before a Sararak, you're going to use your Vile Curse, and then after that, you're immediately going to take your turn and then hit them with the Soul Trap, which they then have to make at disadvantage if they fail the first one. So they have a 15 and then the 19 DC charisma save at disadvantage, which is really nasty. We are going to make some modifications to the Demi-Lich, as it is not scary. It is woefully underwhelming. You're going to bring a little bit of some OG stuff back. So the original Demi-Lich would instantly destroy any creature with its Soul Devour, without a save. It would just pick one, say, and it had a targeting mechanism, so that way the DM wasn't just picking on people, but it literally had, oh, first kill the mage, and then kill this one, then kill that one. But it was literally just, you do it, and then they're done. That said, it would lose all aggro on the party until it was further provoked. So if you provoked it and you got somebody killed and it went back to sleep, and then you just decide, we're gonna not mess around with that anymore. Nobody else would die. I think bringing back that's potentially interesting. In any case, though, I think we should definitely bring back the fact that if a creature fails its save against the soul trap, the creature's body is instantly destroyed. So we are going to keep that. The body is instantly destroyed as it putrefies and turns to slime and mold. Retain the necrotic damage from the 5e version if they save. Most importantly, be willing to let PCs go if they stand. Yeah, exactly. So once we have picked up a kill with that, if they back off, we will let them go. It's just good sportsmanship. While Sararak is less interesting now than he was before as a result of the lack of interactivity with items from the dungeon we described, like throwing gems and stuff. If a player decides to try something out like that, please go nuts and feel free to improvise. I feel like the OG fight really would appreciate that. So if they decide to throw something from the dungeon, they try to use dungeon elements against the boss, rock on. I would not stifle that at all. I would do my best to support that if I could. All right, so if you've decided to make the boss weaker because the boss fight doesn't really match the rest of the adventure, regardless of how difficult it is, it doesn't. Even if with my adjustments up, it's still not close to the fight that a Sararak is. You could make him a little less difficult, and if that's what you wanted to do, I would just make all his loot troll loot. It'd be all potions to forget your bad experience and magic items that are cursed. Just all gags. Keep in mind when you're running this, the Demi-Lich is not aggressive. It really only attacks if they decide to touch him, and being otherwise they're free to rob him blind as the fake puppet show tries to trick them into feeding itself. There is a right way to run this monster, and unfortunately for your players, pissing this thing off is likely to get a few killed before this right. That's true. So yeah, run this thing, run it mean, don't be nice. Use the tips I provided to make sure you're using the best abilities, and hit the hardest hitting people first. Yeah, we won't go too much into tactics for that. All right, this has been a supplemental guide, masterclass, whatever you want to call it, to Tomb of Horrors. If you're interested in my notes or my breakdown of any of this, contact me directly and I'll be happy to work with you on a little more specific stuff. Sources for this video below. I could have missed a few since I put at least 100 hours of work into research, another 10 plus hours into drafting the script, but special thanks go to Matt Colville and Daniel. Matt Colville, we'll say separately. Matt Colville has been a fantastic inspiration to me, and he's been an exceptionally useful source of information for older versions of the game, but not as quite as useful as my next thanks, which goes to Daniel from Bandit's Keep. Daniel is a spectacular OSR content producer, and he produces a lot of really interesting information on the OSR community and kind of how the game played, which is a big part of mine, which definitely informed a lot of the background information I was providing for this video. So please, if you're not familiar with Bandits Keep, give him a like and a follow. Check out his stuff. It's really good OSR stuff. Really interesting. If you're interested in the Tomb of Horrors, you'll probably be interested in OSR, and I definitely recommend checking him out. Matt Colville, I'll circle around back to that. Don't mean to disrespect you, Matt. Sorry. Matt is like my spirit animal. Guy's amazing. Amazing D&D content. Check him out. His DM guide to DM running the game for DMs is a spectacular ongoing running series. And last mention, probably honorable mention, I should say, is Jacob from XP to level 3. Content he produced kind of definitely, I think, was something that inspired me to do this video. So, hey, thanks for that.
Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe so you won't miss future Dungeon Master content from me, the Nerdtastic Pirate. Have a great day.